third session on the Islamic laws of inheritance. So today, inshallah, I will talk about the allocated portions or fractions, if you will, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam have allocated to rightful inheritors. But before I get to that, let me just kind of recap what we have done so far. I'm just going to summarize what we have done. So we began the first of the series looking at the difference between the wasiyah and the faraid. Wasiyah is, of course, the last will and testament, and the faraid refers to the inheritance proper, the Islamic laws of inheritance proper. So they're not the same, but they do intersect. And I had displayed a Venn diagram to show where they intersect concerning 1/3 of the wealth. So 2/3 of the wealth becomes the new whole, and the Islamic laws of inheritance would govern that. And the wasiyah, where it intersects with that 1/3, the inheritor has the right has a discretion how he or she is going to dispense of that 1/3 of the wealth that he or she may leave behind, as well as funeral instruction. These are typically things that we find in the wasiyah. Then we looked at the importance of the Islamic laws of inheritance, al-faraid, right? Because there are many, it's referenced in the Quran, of course, and as well as hadith that speaks of its virtue, its excellence, where the Prophet ﷺ described it as being half of knowledge, and it's one of the first knowledge that will be taken away from the Ummah, not because the books of inheritance are not available or the scholars are not around, but because of neglect by the Ummah. People just won't bother with this part of Islamic law, or they tend to forget it, and or they're not conscious of it, they bypass it, and therefore they do not implement this very important part of Islamic law. So we looked at the hadith and ayat that underscore its importance. Then I had mentioned some specific ayat and hadith that actually talk about inheritance and certain fractions and who gets and the factors and prerequisites and all of that. And coming up now to the last session that I did the last time that we were here, give you the long list of who are the rightful inheritors, male and female. And today, inshallah, I want to speak about the allocated fractions that Islamic law have given to these rightful inheritors. So that's just a quick recap of what we have been talking about. And I just want to emphasize that these are introductory lessons or chapters on the Islamic laws of inheritance, but they are preliminary to understanding the scope and the text works. All right, so today, inshallah, I'm going to talk about the types of inheritance. So scholars divided into two main types because after careful study of Islamic law, that's the Quran and Sunnah, they figured out that it can be broken down into two main types. And one type is called al-irth bi-taqdir or fard, meaning that inheritance by divinely ordained portions. That's how I translated. What it refers to are the specific fractions that are mentioned in the Quran, or by extension hadith, right? The half, the quarter, the 1/3, right? This is not coming from scholars. This is coming from divine law. This is coming from the Quran. They're coming from the inspired words of the Prophet. So we find that certain inheritors, male or female, can get a 1/3 or a quarter. I'll break all of that down in this session, inshallah. So there are specific fractions allocated to them. So this type of inheritance where we find an inheritor getting a third or a half or a quarter or 1/8, as the case might be, it's called inheritance by a divinely ordained portion, or el irthu bil or fard. And the other type would be, of course, those who are not getting a specified um, fraction allocated either in Quran or Hadith. So they kind of share the remainder. So it kind of divvy up after we have a portion fractions to the rightful inheritors, what remains, and we still have some inheritors in the equation, we're going to divvy up the remaining wealth for these inheritors, depending on how many of them are there. We try to do it in sometimes in an equal fashion, but if it's male or female, the male gets twice the share of the female. So those who inherit by the divinely ordained portion, it's called fard, right? But it should not be confused with fard by, like the fard salah that we do, right? Wajib and mandatory. Fard simply means allocation, a divinely allocated portion. That's the context in which we use fard here. So some of the rightful inheritors from the long list that I've given among the male inheritors, female inheritors, the inheritors that get an allocated portion, fraction here, fard, based on the Quran or the Sunnah of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, include the husband, and there's variance depending on how the family equation is. So the husband has one, he has a fard, the wife, the mother, the maternal grandmother, the paternal grandmother, the maternal half brother, and the maternal half sister. So these are specific inheritors who will inherit by a fard, meaning that there's a fraction allocated for them in Islamic law on the inheritance. And then the remainder, those who inherit by what is called ta'sib, meaning that it's not fard, it's not specified, the portion. We just have to see how we can divvy up the rest of the wealth among them, because they are inheritors, but they're not inheriting by a specific fraction, by a fard. So they call those who inherit by ta'sib. And these include the son, the grandson, the blood brother, the paternal half brother, the nephew. That's the brother's son, the paternal half brother's son, the paternal uncle on the father's side only, the maternal uncle's son, the maternal uncle's son on the father's side only. And then some inheritors get both, meaning that they can inherit by a specified portion of fard or by ta'sib. A portion is not specified. And these will include the father and maternal grandfather. All of these things are better understood, of course, with examples, and I will try to give some examples how the fractions actually work out in an inheritance situation equation. And then there are some who they will get a specified portion of fard at times, and then at other times they get ta'sib. So these are the different variables concerning the rightful inheritors and what type of inheritance that they get. As I said, all this is better fleshed out and contextualized with actual example. And that's what we kind of leading up to after this long series of preliminary chapters or lessons. So we understand the importance of inheritance, we understand the prerequisites, the factors, who is an inheritor before we get to actually solving inheritance equations. So today, primarily, we want to look at the fard, right? Those who get a specified fraction of the inheritance, and then time permitting, I'll try to give some example how it's actually work. These are very simple. I try to not go to the complex ones. So these are very simple ones. At times you will see we have to do factorization, or we have to find the LCD, the lowest common denominator. So there's actually some math that's involved. But let's begin with inheritors who get the third that allocated fraction, and I'm going to begin with half. So we're going to look at those who get half the inheritance. We're going to look at those who get a quarter of the inheritance, and I'm going to list them by the gender and so on, and their position in the family, whether they're father, brother, grandmother, and so on. Also, 1/8, 2/3, 1/3, and 1/6. So these are the fractions that Allah mentioned. I mean, subhanAllah. So I don't know what the research will show later on, or if scholars have tried tap into the wisdom behind it. Why did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mention these specific fractions and not others? Why did he mention half, a quarter, 1/8, 2/3, 1/3, and 1/6? I don't know. It reminds me somewhat of the al-huruf al-muqatta'a. These are some surahs of the Quran that begin with abbreviated letters like Yasin, Alif Lam Mim, Sod, Noon, Qaf. Right? Not all surahs begin with abbreviated letters, al-huruf al-muqatta'a. But up to today, we don't know the tafsir of these ayat. Why is these specific surahs? Why this combination of letters, or sometimes one letter, Noon, Qaf, right? Sword is just one letter. Then you have two like the Hamim surahs, and then you have like three Alif Lam Mim, Alif Lam Ra. Up to now, we don't have an authoritative tafsir, right? There's still a mystery in the Quran. The sequencing of these abbreviated letters, the numbering, and they're situating in some surahs of the Quran and not others. So we'll see what research brings to light later on as we apply different scientific understandings and try to figure out. Well, sometimes we may never know. It doesn't mean that we are capable of learning everything about the Quran. There's always a portion of the Quran that is going to be unknown to us because of the greatness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knowledge and the limitations of our own knowledge. We simply cannot grasp everything, or maybe our generation cannot understand everything. It'll take other generations probe and come up with better understanding of some portions of the Quran than we are able to have. So I just throw that out there because I don't know why, but these are divinely accrued, right? Half, a quarter, 1/8, 2/3, a third, and 1/6. So now let's see who gets a half, who gets a quarter, and so on down the list, and I'll try to give some examples of how we solve inheritance equations. So let's start with half, right? Who among the rightful inheritors get half of the inheritance? So these inheritors include, number one, the husband, the daughter, the granddaughter. When we talk about granddaughter here, grandson, sorry. No, it's granddaughter. I made a mistake. The blood sister and the paternal half sister. So these are the rightful inheritors. You can see the gender is mixed. You have male and female. So they would get 1/2, but when do they get 1/2? Right? What has to occur in the family equation that allows them to inherit half of the inheritance? So it doesn't always work out like that because you can have another male relative in the equation who can preclude, right, the daughter of getting the half, for example. So I'm going to go through each one of them and explain when they get that half. What is the situation, the family situation, the social allows them to get half of the inheritance? So let's start with the husband. So if his wife dies, so he survives her, so he's a rightful inheritor. he gets half only if his deceased wife didn't leave behind an offspring. And that offspring can be a male or a female. The husband would get half, right? So this is the general definition when the husband gets half of the insurance. His wife dies and she didn't leave behind a daughter. She didn't leave behind a son. She didn't leave behind, they didn't have any children. That's the only situation in which the husband will get half. So obviously, we can deduce, right? That if died and she left behind an offspring with two, he's not going to get half, right? Because it doesn't fit the definition. So he gets half only when his wife dies, leaving behind no offspring. And then the daughter, she gets half only if a deceased parent, right, the mother, father, died and didn't leave behind a son or sons, in which case they would preclude her, or they didn't leave behind a daughter or daughters, in which case they would share that half with her, right? So that's a definition by which the daughter would get half, because the parent, male or female, mother, father, deceased, didn't leave behind a son. So obviously, the son is there or sons, she's not going to get half. Or if there were no sons and daughters, then she's not going to get half. She's going to, there were daughters, she's going to have to share that half with the other daughter, two or three daughters. You're going to have to share that. Then we have the granddaughter. She gets half only if a deceased grandparent didn't leave behind a grandson, the son's son or more, in which case they preclude her, or or another granddaughter or more, in which case they share with her. So this is an equation in which the daughter is not there, just the granddaughter is there in this family situation, and there's no grandson, right? So, these are just general definitions, but of course, every family situation, as I said, is different, like fingerprints, right? So sometimes, even though this is a general definition, where we actually try to solve it, we find that, oh, well, there's a grandson. So, of course, the equation changes, and she would not be getting that one half. Then the blood sister, she would get one half if a deceased brother didn't leave behind another blood brother or more, in which case they would preclude her, or a blood sister or more, in which case they would share with her, or a male or female offspring or male parent. So all these criteria have to be satisfied before the blood sister gets half, right? Then you have the paternal half sister. She gets a half only if the deceased parent didn't leave behind a paternal brother or more who preclude her, or a paternal sister or more who share with her, or a male or female offspring, or a male or female parent or blood brother or blood sister. I know all of this is something complicated and difficult to process at times, so let's just accept it as general a definition. And when I mention some of examples, you will see how we now apply these fractions, how we actually work it out, because we need to see in a family who are the surviving inheritors. It varies with each. So by general definition, these are the inheritors among the male and female surviving inheritors who are kind of entitled to a half. But upon closer scrutiny and examination, we'll see if they're actually going to get the half. Right? That's how I'm going to phrase it, explain it in this session without getting too bogged down in elaborate details. So let's now look at the quarter. So now let me just remind you that this half, right, it's not coming out of a hat, right? It's not something that scholars have conjured up or they just came up based on some intellectual understanding. This is mentioned in Quran, right? That's why in the very first lesson, I referenced the ayat of the Quran and Hadith, right? So that's where it's coming from. It's coming from divine wisdom, right? It's not man-made or introduced, right, by scholars. So this is what we have to work with. the Islamic law on this kind of change, just as we kind of changed Salatul Maghrib being 3 raka'at, Salatul Isha being 4 raka'at. We have to accept the law. This is how we have to practice it. There's always an issue why Salatul Maghrib is only 3, but yet Isha is 4, and then Salatul Fajr is only 2. We don't know. But this is how the law has come down to us. This is how we embrace this, and this is how we practice this. So again, I just want to emphasize the attractions, where they're coming from. It's coming from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the messenger, sallallahu alayhi wa sallam. We already covered that in earlier lessons. It's an ayat. So now let's look at those who get a quarter. So this is a short list. It involves the husband and wife or wives. So the husband will get a quarter of the inheritance left behind, right? Only if his wife left behind an offspring. So if there's offspring, a male or female. If that didn't have any children, it's different because, as we said earlier, he'll get half. But here his portion is reduced to what? A quarter, because his deceased wife left behind an offspring. It doesn't matter the gender, if it's a male, a son, or a daughter, female offspring. His inheritance is no longer 1/2 because of the existence of a child in the family, a male or female child offspring. He gets a quarter. That's the only time he will get a quarter. Then the wife or / wives, in case there's plural marriages, right? She or they, the surviving wives, because the husband died, they will get a quarter only if the husband didn't leave behind an offspring. So if there's no offspring, the wife is going to get a quarter, or wives, they will have to share that quarter. So there's 2 of them who are entitled to a quarter based on these criteria. Then for the inheritor who gets 1/8, it just involves the wife or wives, right? So if the husband dies, they get 1/8 only if the husband left behind an offspring, right? So this just concerns the wife. So if he didn't leave behind any offspring, then we go back to giving her a quarter if possible, right? But as long as the husband has left behind an offspring, then the wife or wives will share in 1/8. Actually, I did a family inheritance equation recently, and I'll give that example at the end, where the wife, the widow now, was entitled to just 1/8 because of the existence of offspring. I'll come back to that, inshallah. So for 2/3, right, this is another fraction that's divinely ordained, right, coming from the Quran and Sunnah. So who among the inheritors, male and female, gets 2/3? So there are 4 of them. So number 1 is the daughters, right? They share 2/3 of the inheritance only if the deceased parent didn't leave behind a son or more sons, in which case the sons would preclude them. They will no longer be entitled to the 2/3. So this is the criteria. And then the granddaughters, and we talk about granddaughters, it's not the daughters, right? Because that's coming from her husband, who is an outside member of the family, right? By marriage. We talk about the granddaughters in this context, sons' daughters, right? So they're from his loins, the sons, the girls. So the granddaughters, the sons' daughters, they will get 2/3 only if the deceased parent didn't leave behind a grandson, a son's son, or more grandsons coming from the son, in which case they would preclude the granddaughters or an offspring higher than them in lineage. That's you go up, right, to see if there's a grandfather, grandmother, or a father, mother, and so on. Then you have the sisters, that's the blood sisters, right? So they're all from the same family, right? They get 2/3 only if the deceased didn't leave behind a blood brother or more, which case, of course, they preclude them, or a situation with an offspring, male or female, or a male parent. So this sets up the criteria whereby the blood sisters will get 2/3, right? These criteria have to be met. If not, they would not be able to get 2/3 because you have male survivors, inheritors who are there, so who preclude them. Then you have the paternal half sisters. They get 2/3 only if the deceased didn't leave behind a maternal brother or more, in which case they preclude them, or offspring, or male or female, or a male parent, or blood brother, or blood sister, right? So when you get a family situation, that's why I ask people, I don't need to know the exact type of assets that you have that you need to liquidate. All I need to know is your family tree. Who is going to be left behind if you die, so I can help you know what the fractions are. That's all I need to know. All right, then I go through this long list as my reference, and I eliminate, and there's a methodology in how we come to making solutions, inshallah. And then now, so we have two remaining divinely ordained portions of fractions. That's the 1/3 and the 1/6. So let's see what it looks like. So the inheritors who would get 1/3, we haven't done this before, this 1/3 of the inheritance, and that would go to the mother. So the mother gets, meaning that her offspring die, right? So they leave behind her, they leave behind the mother. She would get 1/3 only if the deceased didn't leave behind an offspring or siblings, like brothers and sisters, male or female, or both male or female. That's the only way in which the mom can get 1/3 at the mother. And then the mother's children, right? So these are children from the mother, not the father. So that's her children. They get 1/3 only if the deceased didn't leave behind any offspring or male parent. So only two categories, so only two inheritors would get 1/3, and these are the criteria that have to be met. So it's the mother and then the mother's children, depending on who's there, who are the surviving inheritors in that particular family. And then we come now to the last portion. That's 1/6. We haven't done this before. 1/6. So who gets 1/6? Well, we have the father. He gets 1/6 if the deceased left behind an offspring. The father would get 1/6. The mother also gets 1/6 if the deceased left behind an offspring or a number of siblings. So it's the wider criterion than the first one. So the mother will get that 1/6. The paternal grandfather, he gets 1/6 if the deceased left behind an offspring and didn't leave his father. So the father is not in the equation there, just the grandfather, and that's the paternal grandfather. He would take 1/6. The grandmother, she gets 1/6 if the deceased didn't leave behind his mother or mother, in which case they share it equally. Then the granddaughter, and again, that's the son's daughter or more, maybe granddaughters. She or they will get 1/6. They're entitled to 1/6. If she or they inherit with a male offspring, so there's a female offspring there in the equation, who gets a half. So that would be like the daughter if the son is not around, right? So all this can get very complicated, but as I said, let's just stick with these general definitions and criteria. But when we come to working it out, as I said, each family situation will be different, but we have our charts. We have our charts, who gets a quarter, who gets a 1/8, who doesn't get it if the criteria are not met. We also have a methodology helps us all this. Then we have the paternal grandfather. Yeah, he's in the list too of those who get 1/6. So the paternal grandfather gets 1/6 if the deceased left behind an offspring but didn't leave behind a father. Right. So the father is not in the equation, only the grandfather. He's gonna get that one. Generally speaking. The grandmother, she gets 1/6 too if the deceased didn't leave behind his mother or grandmother, in which case they would share it equally. And then the granddaughters, again, the son's daughter or more granddaughters, they're going to share or get 1/6. If she or they inherit with a female offspring who gets a half. I already covered those who get the half above. Okay, so that's the daughter and the son is not there. And the deceased didn't leave behind a grandson because the grandson is like on her status because their grandchildren, he would preempt to preclude her. So she would no longer be entitled to that 1/6 because of the existence of the grand. But if this criteria is met, as I've spelled it out, yes, the grandson is not there and so on. Yeah, the granddaughter, granddaughters on the son's side, they will get at once. And there's two more. You have the paternal half sister, she or they get 1/6. If she or they inherit with a blood sister who gets a half, so there's a female inheritor who's getting half in that equation. They will get 1/2. So sometimes we end up with mixed factors as you right, 1/6 is the same as 1/2. And the deceased didn't leave behind a paternal brother or more, in which case they preclude them. And then last we have the mother's offspring. The mother's children, male or female, he or she gets 1/6 if the deceased didn't leave behind an offspring and male parent. So all these, so that's a complete list of those rightful inheritors, surviving inheritors, who at times will get a half, a quarter, 1/8, 2/3, 1/3, 1/6. We have to be exhaustive in our referencing, all right, to see if the criteria are properly met and who's there in that family situation that would preclude them and so on, right? But these are our basic general guidelines. It's coming from the Quran and Sunnah. These are the only inheritors, male and female, who would get the half, the quarter, the 1/8, the thirds, 1/3, and the 1/6. Right, so this is a very important reference. Without this, we can't solve family inheritance. Right, this becomes an indispensable chart of the allocated faraid, divinely ordained portions. And the Prophet ﷺ said, he said, Al-Haku bil faraid, that you always start with the persons who are going to get this further portion. That's what you begin with. And then you see what the inheritance problem looks like, right? They always try to find out. A family comes to me and they said, hey, I have a grandfather, I have a father, I have some siblings. So I ask them, let's go up. Let's see who are up, right? Who are above you, so to speak. Right? Do you have a father? Do you have a grandfather? Do you have a grandmother? Do you have a great grand? So we go up to see who's there. And then we take a sort of lateral view, right? So we're going to look at siblings. So we're going to list them all. Not all of them are going to get because part of the methodology is that the closest relatives gets first and then the distant relatives, we extend it out if the immediate relatives are not there. Like, for example, you have a situation where the family has a son, so the son will preclude the brothers, even though the siblings are there, right? He just gets priority. So that's part of the methodology, how we work it out. So we start there, we look and see who's there in the family, all right? And once we know who they are, we come back to our reference charts and we see what the mixed fractions look like. It always involves a mixed fraction because you have some inheritors who are getting a quarter, 1/8, 2/3. So we have to solve for mixed fractions. All right. So this is the list. These are the criteria. These are the people. These are the male and female inheritors who are going to get by fund, right? And based on the criteria, sometimes they don't get the full portion, they don't get the half, they don't get the quarter, they don't get the 8, they don't get the 2/3, they don't get the 1/3 or the 6 because of the existence of other people who are on the same level like them based on the gender, like the granddaughter would get a certain portion allocated, the third, but only if the grandson is not there. Right? So that's how it's going to work. But this is our guidelines, and these are the basic. So now to flesh all of this out, all of that information is hard to process mentally, right? You need examples. Right? Just like teaching tajweed, you could teach about the model arid sukun and the model lean and all these other tajweed rules, but they need an ayah, as Brother Salim was referencing it. You look at the ayah, see what the ayah ends with, the long vowel, and then we determine what type of mad that it ends. Right? So the ayat of the Quran contextualizes the tajweed of Quran, the rules of tajweed, and based on the different qira'at and so on, we know how to modulate the stresses and so on and so forth. With inheritance, we need examples, right, to flesh out, to contextualize how these fractions are broken down, how we solve for mixed fractions. We have to do some factorization at times, or sometimes we can just look at a mixed fraction. Like if you see a half and 1/6, you know the common denominator there is of course 6. So we solve for 6, right? Sometimes you have to, it could be a bit more complicated. You have to find the LCD, the least common denominator, and it doesn't go beyond 24. All right. So let me give you, having said that, let me try to now illustrate and contextualize how all of this information comes together, or some of it, in solving inheritance problem, or I should say issue, right? It's not really, well, we could say problem too, right? But I like issue. Okay, so recently I did one. So the person died, and male, and the inheritors that he left behind was a wife, so she's now a widow, and 3 sons. So one son was from her, and 2 sons was from the previous marriage. So those are the only inheritors. So they may be siblings, but because of the sons being there, they would preclude, like he would preclude his uncles, basically. The sons preclude their uncles, right? So that's part of the methodology. We look to see who is the closest there. But we start off with the rightful inheritors because the sons, they don't have an allocated, divinely ordained portion. They are not inheriting by thought, but by taqsim, right? So in this situation, I found out that the widow, because her deceased husband left behind offspring. Now, if there was no offspring, based on the chart that I just referenced, she would get a quarter. But there were offspring, there were 3 sons, right? One from a previous marriage and one with her. So yeah, I have the widow and you have 3 sons. So now she gets 1/8 of the inheritance. So that was the fraction. So 1/8, um, if we use 1/8, then 7/8, right, to make up the whole. So if the widow is getting 1/8, then the 7/8 will have to be divided among the 3 sons. So this was an easy one, and I discussed it with the family, and that that's what we arrived at. So the sister had to take her 1/8, and the rest divided among the surviving inheritance by priority, the sons. All of them turned it down, and that money went to um, charity, which is okay, right? I mean, but we have to do it the right way. We have to find out what were the portions. And then you can do with that inheritance what you want, right? You can refuse it, you can turn it down, you can say, hey, give it to charity, but at least we did it right according to Islamic um, law. Um, so I'm going to give some simple examples, but the books on Faraid, Islamic laws of inheritance, right? It's voluminous, right? Sometimes it's like it's encyclopedic, and then it has inputs from the Mazahib, the Hanifi school, the Shafi school, the Maliki school, the Hanbali school. There's a lot of hadith in which the Prophet solved family inheritance equations, and he decreed who gets what and so on. We have quite a number of hadith on that. We have the portions that I mentioned, the 1/6, where it's coming from the Quran and so on. But as I said, again and again, every family situation is different. So we want to refer to our charts and we want to use the methodology. And some of the books have a lot of hypothetical examples because scholars were so diligent in trying to unpack and deconstruct the Islamic laws of inheritance. So a lot of it is very complicated and filled with a lot of hypothetical situation that I would not go into. I'm just going to try to keep it brief because this science is best understood through Arabic. Arabic has some terminologies that are so precise that in English it's a struggle to find what's the exact equivalent, right? In terms of the inheritors, in terms of gender and lineage and ancestry and so on. So I made it an introductory lessons, right, on the science of inheritance. So let me give two examples and then I'll close inshallah. Because this session we're just focusing on the divinely ordained portion, right? The furud or fara'id that have come down in the Quran and Sunnah and the criteria that have been set by which these inheritance will get the 1/8, the 1/6, the 1/3, and so on. So here's another example. So you have a family where the surviving inheritors, daughter, a granddaughter, that's the son's daughter. And then a father and mother. So these are the only people we examine, we ask questions, and we found out that these are the inheritors, right? These are the people, these are the surviving family members, right? A daughter, a granddaughter, a father, and mother. That's it. All right, so here, the daughter would get half, right? Because the deceased didn't leave behind a son. All right, so yes, we can give the daughter half. So we are working out for this is a methodology, this is how it works. So we look to see who in this family, the surviving rightful inheritors are going to get divinely ordained portions. 1/6, 1/8. Start there. That's what the hadith says. Start there. So there's no son, so there's a daughter. So yes, we say good, half for her. Then there's also a granddaughter. So the granddaughter, that's the son's daughter. So the granddaughter here would get 1/6 because the deceased didn't leave behind a son, and she's inheriting. That's the granddaughter is inheriting with a female offspring who's getting half. That's the daughter. So the granddaughter here would get the son's daughter will get 1/6. We are working out first according to the methodology. The further portion, those who are getting the divinely ordained portion. And then we'll have to solve because there's going to be some mixed fractions. Then we have the father. What does he get in this family situation as a surviving inheritor? He gets 1/6 too because the deceased left behind an offspring. And who's the offspring? The daughter. So the father here will get not a quarter, but 1/6. And then the mother, she's the last one. She will get 1/6 because the deceased left behind an offspring. Again, that's the daughter. So when we use a methodology, as in this example, we start with those who are getting the divinely ordained portions or in the fund. But these are stipulated in Islamic law. So when we look at it, what do we find? Daughter getting a half. That's the first fraction. The granddaughter getting 1/6. The father getting 1/6. And then there's a third 1/6, the mother. So what do we have? We have mixed fracture, right? Unlike fraction. We have a half plus 1/6 plus 1/6 plus 1/6 to make up the whole. We have to find the common denominator. So you could, factorization, you can just look at that. Half plus 1/6 plus 1/6 plus 1/6. And you can tell it's 6, right? 6 is going to be the common denominator. So now the half is equivalent now to how much? Right? You have to do some math, right? The half is equivalent now to 3/6. Right? So you have 3/6. when we solve for the common denominator, 3/6, which is half, that's what the daughter is getting, plus 1/6, plus 1/6, plus 1/6 to give us the whole. All right. So now we know so we have made them now equal fraction. All right. So the daughter now, her half is actually 3/6, right? If we reduce it, we get a half. So if a family comes to me and they said, hey, Sheikh, the person died, left behind a daughter, a granddaughter, a mother, and a father, I said, no problem. I consult my charts. I said, this is the breakdown of the fractions. I don't need to know how much money you have. I don't need to know what types of wealth you have. You have to go to figure out that how you liquidated, come up with a unified number, and then divide it by the fractions. All right. So I tell them, I worked it out, I solved it for you. Here's what it looks like. The daughter is going to get half, 3/6. The granddaughters get 1/6. The father gets 1/6, and the mother gets 1/6. Right? So let's say the inheritance was $24, right? $24 remain. So if we divide that now in these equal fractions, 1/6, 1/6, 1/6 a half, the granddaughter 1/6 of that inheritance, the number is $24. She gets $4. That's the inheritance. The father, he gets $4. That's his 1/6. The mother gets $4. That's her 1/6. And then the daughter, remember, she's getting half, 3/6. She gets $12. Problem solved. We have obeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We have followed the Sharia. And this is how the inheritance will be worked out for this particular family. Consulted our charts. We use the methodology. And now the rest is up to you how you proceed to divide the wealth according to these actions. All right. So that's one example. That's an easy example. But even the easy example, sometimes you can see there's unlike fractions, and we just have to make them equal fractions. It can be more complicated on that. But I think for my study of the books of Islamic laws of inheritance, it doesn't go beyond 24. The LCD doesn't go beyond 24. In some cases, 36. But those are kind of hypothetical examples. I don't think a family situation gets so complicated that you have to get an LCD of the highest it can go is like, in sort of real life situations, I think is 24 of Adam. You never know what people confront you with, right? And you have to just be very exhaustive and looking. So who are there in the family? I want to know everybody who's there. Let's go up. Father, grandfather, stepfather, great grand. Just collect all the names and the relationship to the deceased. We use our reference charts. We use a methodology, and then we come up with the fractions, and that's how it's going to be applied to the inheritance that's left. Let me give you another example. So I'll give you two. So this one, a family comes to me. They say, Sheikh, the deceased left behind inheritors. We don't know how to go about working out. The people agree. They're practitioners of Islam. They fear Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They want to do right by the deceased. So they just don't have the prerequisites, as I talked in the earlier lectures on inheritance, right? We got to look at the prerequisite. We got to certify the death. We got to make sure that the inheritors are who they say. Just can't take your word for it. Are you really the spouse? Are you really the son? I want to see a birth certificate. I want to verify. You trust, as the saying goes, you trust, but you verify. Because we have to make sure that the prerequisites are met. Just as for Salah, we just can't go on prayer. We have to know if the time for Dhuhr has come in, right? Otherwise, we'll be praying the wrong Salah at the wrong time. We have to make wudu. We have to be in a state of tahara. You just can't say Allahu Akbar. You have to face the east, the Qibla. Salah has prerequisites that have to be met. In inheritance, the same. So we trust, but we verify. But okay, For the sake of example, we have verified, and I found out that with this particular family now, the inheritors that are left behind that survived the deceased, blood sister, it's a paternal sister, it's a maternal sister, it's a mother. All right, so I go to my charts of those who are allocated in Islamic law based on Quran and Sunnah, the further portions. I found out that the blood sister gets a half because the deceased didn't leave behind a blood brother. Half. I look at my charts, I found out that the paternal sister now will have to get 1/6 because the deceased didn't leave behind a blood sister who gets half together with whom she inherits. So that's like 1/6. And then the maternal sister, she gets 1/6 because the deceased did leave behind, sorry, uh, an offspring. Right? There's a lot of sisters here. And then only one parent was left behind. That's the mother. So we look at the charts. We know sometimes the mother can get a quarter, or maybe 1/6. Let's see if she meets the criterion of getting 1/6. Yes, she gets 1/6 because the deceased didn't leave behind a sibling. So you solve it for the same way that we did the previous one. We have not mixed fraction, we have unlike fractions. So we have a half and we have 1/6, 1/6, 1/6, right? So factorization, the common denominator there is going to be 6. So we end up with the same um, fractions. Half, 1/6, 1/6, half would be 3/6. Then you have 1/6, 1/6, 1/6. That makes up the whole. So whatever is the sum of money that remaining, you're going to divide it by these um, fractions. So these are, like 3 examples. And as I said, anyone who has studied the Islamic laws of inheritance, they always discuss the masala gharibatan, right? Gharibatan, because this actually occurred in Islamic history, and they kind of cite it as examples in Islamic law, how if you have these scenarios in a family situation, judgment has already been given because the Muslims in the past encountered it. And this goes back to the time of the companions, especially the period of Umar. So it's called the Umaratan, right? Because Umar faced this, and this is how he ruled, right? So sometimes the masala, the issue is called Umaratan, meaning the 2 Umars, because Umar faced these 2 scenarios, and this is how he solved it. Right? I'll get to it. Or it's called the Gharibatan, right? Because it's kind of unusual, Gharib, right? Strange. It's called Gharibatan, or sometimes the Fuqaha call it Gharrawan, Gharrawan, right? So these are different names given to these 2 famous family inheritance problems that surfaced in the early Muslim community. It was during the caliphate of Umar, and this is how he solved it. So let me give you the first ghariba, right? The first family scenario. So they came to him, to Umar, and they said, we have a family inheritance situation here. We want to solve it. And he asked the same question: who are the inheritors? Who are the surviving um, members? So in the first scenario, you had the husband, you had the father, and you had the mother. So husband, the widower means that his wife died, right? And she left behind just him and her father and mother, no offspring. That's it. 3 people, 3 inheritors: husband, father, mother. No problem. We go to our charts. Umar lived with the Prophet. He knew the Islamic laws of inheritance. So sometimes they knew what the Prophet said, the New Quran, of course. And just they didn't have a real example to work with, but they knew how it was allocated, right, in Islamic law. So they made those references, they were able to solve it. At other times, they had to make their own ijtihad. Like, so there's a lot of ijtihad concerning grandparents in some situation, right? And how Abu Bakr radiallahu anh ruled was different to how Ali ruled and how Umar ruled. They just had to use ijtihad because it wasn't clear in the Quran or Sunnah, how to actually, you know, govern and come up with a judgment or fatwa on a situation. There's a famous example. It just popped up in my mind as I'm talking about this, and I'll get back to these two famous examples in Umar's time. So Ibn Mas'ud had left Medina after the Prophet ﷺ died, and he was one of the companions who migrated after the Muslims had defeated the Roman, not the Roman Empire, but the Persian Empire. So all that know was part of the growing Islamic empire. So he was there in Kufa, right? So he was there as a governor, he was there as a mu'allim, a teacher. That's a companion of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. Who better person than one of the companions to go there, give dawah, teach people, make judgments concerning the issues. So while Ibn Mas'ud was there, radiallahu an, a sister came to him from the community and she said her husband has died and he never paid her the dowry, right? So she is demanding from the parents, she's not getting her right. She said, um, they're giving me the inheritance portion, but I am not getting the dowry portion, right? So this is a situation that Ibn Masud had to solve, right? Does the wife, when the husband die, does she get only her inheritance portion, or does she get also from the wealth that the husband left behind a dowry too? That's a big problem, right? I mean, so Ibn Masud didn't have an answer off the bat, right? So he said, I don't have an answer for you, sister. You got to come back to me after a certain amount of time. I forget, was it a week or a month? So he gave her time so he could ponder over it, he can consult over it, he can reference the charts are being hadith of the Prophet Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam and so on, right? Before he gave a ruling. He didn't just said, well, I think it's so and so, and this is my ruling, I'm in charge. No, Ibn Masud is pious. Ibn Masud fears Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Ibn Masud wants to follow the Quran and the Sunnah, so he's deliberated rather than giving a rushed answer. So he deliberated. He made istikhara. He made tahajjud. He consulted with the companions, right? And then when he held court again, after a week or maybe a month, I don't remember the exact time, the sister came back for judgment. All right, so everything is on hold. What does the sister want? She wants both things. She wants her just portion of inheritance, and she wants her dowry too that the husband did not pay, coming out of the wealth of the husband. So when she came back to the court, Ibn Masud said, I did my shura, I did my tahajjud, istikhara, all of that. And my verdict is that you're going to get your allotted portion of the inheritance and you're going to get the dowry that was not paid. So we're going to exact that dowry amount from the wealth that your husband left behind. And then what's remaining, we're going to give you your allocated third portion of it, right? And so now this is a ijtihad. This is like what he thought was the best answer and judgment that he could have come up with. And the sister seemed okay. He's the leader. He's the governor of Kufa. Great. So now, alhamdulillah, I'm going to get my two things, right? My portion plus my dowry. And it so happened that a companion had come from Medina, and he was part of that court, that assembly, that majlis meeting that Ibn Masud Paul had convened, and he stood up and he said, لَقَدْ سَمِعْتُ رَسُولَ اللَّهِ صَلَّى اللَّهُ عَلَيْهِ وَسَلَّمْ قَدَ مِثْلُ مَا قَضَيْتَ يَا Ibn Masud. Which means, he said, Ibn Masud, he said, I have heard the Prophet give a similar judgment as the judgment that you have given today, Ibn Masud. And Ibn Masud, it mentioned in the fiqh books that this was the happiest day of his life because his reasoning, his ijtihad conform with the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ that he was not aware of, but another companion was in the presence of the Prophet ﷺ, knew about that ruling, and it coincided. He laughed, he smiled. That was the happiest day in Ibn Mas'ud life. So, so we have a lot of, I mentioned this to show you that, this is where the rubber hits the road, so to speak, right? So um, we can have all this information, but how we put it into practice, it varies. That's why there's consultation. You have to reference things. You have to use a methodology. That's what Ibn Masud was able to deal with. That just popped up in my head as an example. So let me get back now to the Umara. And these are two famous Masala enders. So they came to Umar and they said, "Hey, this is the scenario. How do you rule?" He said, "Who are the inheritors? The person died. Who are the inheritors? Husband, father, mother." So the husband he gets a half, right? um, because the deceased wife didn't leave behind any offspring. So the husband here is going to get half. The father gets 2/6 because the husband gets half. The rest of the inheritance, therefore, is divided between the surviving parents, right? Resulting in the father getting twice the share of the mother based on the Quranic. And you guys can reference this in Surah Nisa. Surah Nisa, as I said at the beginning of the introductory lesson, contain most of the laws of inheritance as far as the Quran is concerned. So Allah says in Surah 4, Ayah 11, He says, لَذَكَرِ مِثْلُ حَظَ الْأُنْثَيَيْنِ, right? That the male gets twice the share of the female. This is a judgment that Allah has given. That's why the father here, because who are the inheritors? The husband, the father, and mother. So the husband, if the husband is getting half, then from that equation, only half remains. The other half remains, but the other half can go equally quarter to the father and mother, because the father and mother here being in the equation, he's going to get twice the share of the mother based on this eye of the Quran. So we solve these unlike fractions now, and we give him 2/6. He'll get 2/6. And the mother now will get 1/6, because 2/6 plus 1/6, that's a half. So that's remaining half. That's how we divide. That's how Umar, right? That's how Umar, but that's how we will do it too. So I'm not incorrect in saying that. If a family comes and this is the scenario, I'll say this is an easy one, because this masala was solved way back in Umar's time. This is how we break it down. Father, husband, you take half. The father, we're going to give him 2/6, because his share of that remaining half is twice the share of the mother. All right, because 2/6 plus 1/6 make up 3/6, that's the other half. And then the mother will get that remaining 1/6. Why? Because the father the husband is getting twice her share. And that's how Umar solved it. So it broke down into a half, 2/6, 2/6 and 1/6. And then the other scenario, so this became very famous because it was kind of strange. And that's why it's called Ghariba. And some people give it the laqab, the nickname of Umar, because it was famous at its time. And it became recorded as part of Islamic legal discourse. So when you study the books of, inheritance, you always come across this example. And it's good to mention, because again, it happened, it occurred, it was solved. And we see how all the nuts and bolts come together, and how we go about looking to see who gets the portion, what's remaining, how we divide it, right? So in the second scenario, they came to Umar and they said, "Hey, this is the situation. We want to know how to solve the inheritance problem." Umar said, "Who are the inheritors?" That's the first thing we ask and verify. So it was the wife remaining. So now she's widow. So meaning husband died, and he left behind also a father and mother. So it's kind of similar to the first scenario, but whereas the first scenario, it was the husband who survived his wife, In this second scenario, the wife has survived the husband, but the father and mother are still there in the equation. So we consult the Quran and Sunnah, which consult our chart, so to speak, about the allotted portion, the half, the 1/8, the 2/3, the quarter. And we find that the wife here is going to get a quarter because the deceased husband didn't leave behind any offspring. All right, so that criterion is met. So we're going to get a quarter. That's what the chart say. If the deceased husband died, didn't leave behind any offspring. If there was offspring, it's going to be different. We look at the charts again and see how that fraction has changed. And then again, half the father will, so a quarter, it means that 3/4 now have to be divided between the father and mother. And again, we go back to that Quranic principle, لِلذَّكَرِ مِثْلُ هَذَا الْأُنثَيَيْنِ, that the male gets twice the share of the female. So the husband here gets half because the rest of the inheritance is divided between the surviving parents of the deceased. So the father is going to take half, resulting in him getting twice the share of the mother based on that ayah of the Quran, Surah 4:11. And then the mother gets a quarter, all right, because her husband shares the remainder of the inheritance with her, which is half, after the wife of the deceased took a quarter of it, getting twice. So this is how Umar worked it out. This is the judgment that he gave. This is how he solved these two famous masala, these two famous family inheritance problems that surfaced in his time. It has been recorded in the books and handed down, and it gives us, good examples to illustrate how we go about, using the charts and the whole methodology about solving. So I'll leave it there. These are quite probably like 5 examples. All right, so I'll stop here, inshallah.
Sheikh, can I have a question, and in all the details, I can't precisely describe where you mentioned this thing, but the last point you're making, that the principle of male and the female inheritor is that the male father, mother, the father gets twice the share of the mother, the male gets twice the share of the female. Yeah. But a little bit earlier than that, when you started to give these practical examples, but I don't remember all the details. Generally, you were saying, as far as I can remember, somebody died and they left a father and a mother, and they left somebody else who was entitled to half the share. So you worked it out. You said you worked it out. Half the share went to this person, and the other half was divided.
No, it was just a correction on the fraction. It was a quarter.
No.
It was a widow who, her husband died. So he left offspring. Yeah, so if he didn't leave offspring, her share would have been a quarter. So she got 1/8. So those are the fractions. Yeah. So if there was no offspring, her allotted portion, the father would have been a quarter, not a half, a quarter.
No.
Yeah, he had 2 sons from a previous marriage and then a son with her. So he's leaving behind her, right? His wife, now a widow, and 3 sons.
No, I'm not talking about that example. The one that I'm trying to remember, as I said, you gave so many. I can't pinpoint it precisely now. Maybe when I go back over the recording. But what you ended up with is one inheritor who was entitled to half, and 3 others had to share in the other half. And among those 3 was a husband and wife, like a mother and father or something. And your solution was half goes to this person who is entitled to half, and the other half was divided among 3 people, including the mother and father. And you said 1/6 for each one.
Oh, yeah.
But then in that case, the mother and the father, male and female, are both getting equal shares. 1/6, 1/6.
Yeah. So in Omar example, that's how he ruled. He followed that ayah. And in this example that I give, found in the fiqh books, this is how they broke it down. the daughter getting a half because the deceased didn't leave behind a son, and the granddaughter, that's the son's daughter, gets a 1/6. So these are the unlike fractions.
Yeah.
And then
But
yeah, the father gets 1/6, right? Because the deceased left behind an offspring. So
and and the
yeah,
mother,
so here it works out to sort of equal fraction 1/6, 1/6 because of the different criterion here. The deceased left behind an offspring, which in this case was a daughter.
so this is one case where that ayah about the man getting twice as much as the woman does not apply.
It doesn't apply. Yeah.
Okay. Okay.
All
I just
right.
want.
Yeah. So that's why, as I said, we also have to consult the chart. So that's why it's called Gharibatan, right? Very strange because um, they were the only surviving inheritance. And this is how Umar proceeded, and none of the companions contradicted him. So it was almost like a ijma, a of opinion. It was also a judgment by a Khalifa, and it recorded and part of the Islamic discourse on inheritance at the Umaratan or the Gharibatan. But in this one, you see that it becomes equal fraction 1/6, 1/6 because the offspring was there, right? Surviving, which in this case was the daughter who was getting half. So here it's not twice the male, twice the share of the female, but equal portion because of the existence, the surviving inheritor being a daughter getting half. Any other questions? Assalamu alaikum. Yeah. Oh, okay. I think I don't know, there was like a mute. There was a little mute there for a while.
Right.
Yeah.
So, any questions? Salam asked this question already, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I think as you said, we had digested this information, right?
Yes. Yeah, so it's best understood. I try to give as much examples as I can, simple ones, and not make it too complicated because when you study the fiqh books, it's too hypothetical, right? These are just how it would look like, but we want to deal with real examples. So there was two famous one in Umar's time, and I gave you some simple ones where it shows a little factorization have to be done because not every time the fractions are going to be like fractions, going to be unlike, and you just make them like fractions. So it's a little LCD is involved.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps the next time too, you could, if you want to use a screen, you can show an actual,
yeah. So so this will be my next session, inshallah, and maybe the final one here would be just to go over some of the maxims, right? To take it away from the hypothetical, right? This is what you actually have to look at. So it is going to come up, right? What are the maxims? Like if you have a convergence of male inheritors, how do you prioritize? Who gets precluded, who doesn't get precluded? So those are the maxims we will look at. And then, the chart would be a good idea just to give you not hypothetical example, but example have been done in Islamic history, right? How it has been worked out by consulting the charts, looking at the relationship of the surviving inheritors to the person who died, and solving for the fractions, inshallah. And Imtiaz, I'll leave it as a PowerPoint for you, right? So, or anybody, I'll have it too, who needs to take time off to digest and go over it. They'll have it as a reference document, inshallah. The introductory factors, as well as some of the real examples how the family inheritance issues were solved.
Okay, inshallah. Jazakallah khairan for a great presentation. And inshallah, we'll follow up with, you said two more sessions, right? Inshallah.